Exception handling, what it is, how we use it, what are alternatives to exception handling. So here's a piece of code. I'm going to create an exception and throw it just to simulate if something was to go wrong at runtime. I click on a button and there you go. It throws an exception. My application crashed. Well, that's not what I want. If I suspect something is going to go wrong, I can do this. I can surround that piece of code with add try, left brace, right brace, then add catch, and its exception, and then within braces some piece of code to handle that exception. I'm just going to log it, and then add finally within brace some action. So now let's see what would happen. Exception is thrown. Exception goes into the catch block, and it says that got my exception. Then it's going to go to add finally, and application will keep running. So basically, add finally runs always whether an exception is thrown or not thrown. Let's see again. I'm not going to throw an exception. So I did declare the exception, but I'm not going to throw it. You see, finally did run. Last time I threw an exception, I went into the catch block and finally block ran. This time I did not throw an exception. Catch block did not execute. It was skipped, but the finally block did get executed. So finally gets executed whether an exception was thrown or not thrown. Another point to notice is that if I had a more specific exception like a database connection not open exception or a web service unavailable exception, I would put it here first of all. Let's say I had a more specific exception. I would put that first. If there was a more specific, like database, web service not unavailable exception. So that's the more specific exception, more generic exception, and this exception is the most generic of all. So that's one rule, and the other one is the finally always runs. What are other alternatives to exception handling, and would you enclose everything in try-catch block? Of course no. Let's say, for example, you want to load an image file from the resource. So you have NSString image path, and from the NS bundle, path for resource mypicture2.png of type CD. Let's say there's a picture you want to load and it's not there. Instead of having a try-catch block, you have a if statement and you check it. See, if image path is nil, then you log a message saying that the missing image in the resource, as opposed to enclosing it in try-catch finally block, it may not be appropriate. So that's one situation. Let's see how that would work. I come in here, I try to load it, I check it. See, if it's equal to null, I'm going to say I log a message saying it's missing. So that's one alternative, to use if statements to check for certain conditions. Now you may have other conditions saying if it's not equal to null, is it of a particular size, or if it was a number, if it's not equal to nil, then if it's greater than 0, then do this. So using if statements to make checks. Here's another way. Within File Manager, you can create NSError, error equal to nil, an instance of NSError. Then you have your File Manager, and it has a parameter. That method can take in that error. An ampersand means you are passing it by value. I covered it in another tutorial. Then that method will fill your error variable, and then you can check if there was an error or not. So that's another way, and it would work like this. Create an instance of error, create an instance of NS dictionary. Now attributes, I'm gonna try to call NS file manager, default manager, attributes of all that, and send in the attribute add error, sorry, only the error by value. Then I can check if error is not equal to nil, some error did take place, and it'll log an error saying that an error took place because that file does not exist. So that's another way. Instead of exception handling, you can check where possible. You look for this if it does take an error type,